All right, welcome everybody. Hello. Hello. Is everybody okay? Good. I'm Michael. Hello. Good evening. This is the April meeting of CSTA NYC, formerly known as CSNYC Meetup. This is a particularly exciting event for us. Tom proposed this, I don't know, 3 years ago, 6 months ago, that this was something that they were working on as a group and that by April they would be ready to share with us. Assessment, I knew when he shared what the work was and what they would be talking about that this would have a really nice draw. When I was in graduate school, one of the domains that I worked in was early childhood mathematics with a guy named Herb Ginsberg, who's known in this space. And we were trained as interviewers always to ask, how do you know? Like you'd have a little kid count up to 5 or tell you that there were 5 blue bears, and you'd say, well, how do you know? And they would demonstrate, and you would learn something about the difference between performance and understanding. And then I took my kids to my graduation, and my son said, why did Daddy want us to be so bored today? Thereby declaring, I think declaring an essential truth that research can be extremely boring, but it's not always boring. And the work that is happening here today, I think is going to be really interesting. And as our organization switches gears from a New York City focus to a national focus, I can attest to the fact that everywhere we go, people want to know better how to assess student learning and frankly, adult learning as well, as we know that this work is a learning experience for everybody involved. And so it really couldn't be more timely. Before I turn it over to this esteemed group of educators, we have at least one announcement. Gordy, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah. That's okay. I think I can do that. Sorry. I think most of you have heard, but through so many emails that I've sent out or my students have sent out about the Girls in CS conference bit by bit this weekend. So this is like a Grace Hopper for high school. So there's it's panels and lectures and a couple of keynotes and lots of food and swag, of course. So if you could pass this on to your students to register if they're interested, it's bitbybit.dalton.org. I'll be around if you want to ask some more questions.
It's an awesome day.
Diane and I went last year. It truly is an awesome day. I highly recommend it. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Tom and this what is going to be a fascinating hour. Get your questions ready. There is a microphone at the center aisle here, so at the end of the proceedings, you will have an opportunity to queue up and ask a burning question. Thank you.
Very exciting. I've been mic'd for the occasion, so I'm going to pass the mics on. Hey, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming out on a school night, a night where the weather started out so terrible, but then cleared up just for this event. The sun came out and said, I want to learn about CS assessment. So we're very excited to have, this is our first panel, and these are our CS assessment fellows, or one part of them that could make it down here after school. We were 12 in total who went on a journey this year together. Really did. It's exciting. They're going to introduce themselves in just a second, but I wanted to set the scene a little bit even before that happens. First of all, I am Tom OConnell. I'm the Interim Executive Director at Code Interactive, soon to be Code Interactive with Mouse. Very exciting things. We did this amazing project as we were applying for grants through the year. Sometimes you get asked to do something that you really find to be a special project, that you really want to do, but didn't quite expect to get asked to do it, which is exciting. So the Google team partnered with us pretty closely on making this happen. They found that we were really interested in CS assessment, and they were really interested in CS assessment. So we found a crew to work together. And we worked with Sarah Bonner and her team at Hunter, who we're already very good friends with, to come up with the design for this program. And the rest was assessment history. It was exciting. So we looked at some things like establishing the problem around CS assessment, like how do we develop these resources and what do teachers struggle with? And we collected a lot of best practices and a lot of resources that we are eventually, not today, unfortunately, but eventually going to, hopefully by the end of this week, we'll be done uploading everything onto our CS assessment library that more folks can actually add to as well. So this is a living kind of experience that hopefully will become many, many resources provided by many, many people. And we have another assessment project that we'll explain in our second panel a little bit more about, where this is going to live on even further. So very excited to introduce our first crew. Let's go around and share who we are, what we teach, and where. Exciting things.
I guess I'll start.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Will Brown. I teach at Uncommon Prep Charter High School in Canarsie, Brooklyn. I teach AP Computer Science Principles and an Intro to Computer Science course that was modeled off of ECS to focus more around the programming aspects of computer science.
Thanks, Will. I'm Christy Jones. I teach exploring computer science and also mostly biology. Unfortunately, I don't get a full day of CS, but and I teach in Hell's Kitchen at the High School of Hospitality Management.
Hello, I'm Katie Jurgens. I teach at the Dalton School in the high school for computer science, and you should have your kids come to Bit by Bit.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Lynn Hazelman. I crossed the tunnel this morning. I'm from Paterson, New Jersey. I teach pre-K through 8 and just the basics of computers to them, and I get to focus a lot on computer science because I think it's fun.
Hi, I'm Meg Yar. I teach in Paterson as well at a different school. I teach kindergarten through 4th grade, and I technically teach instructional technology, but I have a very code-heavy class.
Hi, I'm Brian Schott. I teach 11th and 12th grade at Bronx Academy for Software Engineering. I'm teaching a web development course, so it's HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then backend with Ruby. And then I'm also teaching the AP CSA.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Donald St. Germain. I teach at Wings Academy High School in the Bronx, and I teach Intro to Computer Science as well as AP CSP.
Very, very cool. So as you see, we had a group of K through 12 people with us. It's kind of amazing. So we talked about assessments first in our little grade pods, and then we kind of went from there. But I'd love to, instead of me telling you exactly what we did as a part of the CS assessment fellows, I'd love to share, like, what did you do? You can kind of build off of each other. Pass the mic around.
Well, let's first set the stage. We all taught all day long and then came home and used some of those things that we like to use with the students. We used video chatting, which you guys might not think is a lot, but that's the first step into computer science, being able to interact with people when you're not right next to them. Then we took a hard look at what we're actually doing in our classes and how we form a grade from putting kids on the internet.
To add on to that, we just really had conversations with one another. I think that's always one of the best way teachers learn, just interacting and talking with other teachers, educators. So in sharing the resources that we've been using in our classrooms, providing the rationale behind the steps that why we chose to use these resources, and getting great feedback from fellow educators really focused a lot of the work that we did throughout this year.
We also were able to steal a lot of ideas from each other.
Exciting thing.
Not so much steal, but create a doc repository.
Yeah.
Borrow.
Beg, borrow, and steal was what I was taught, like in grad school. That's the thing. Cool. And we did get to set the scene as well with a full day workshop. We did all chill in person first, and we set the scene about the types of assessment, the goals of the project, and I'm curious, no one mentioned I came up with a cute name for our protocol that we used. What we did all the time. We did show and tell. It was great. I think it already exists, basically. I didn't invent it. I begged, borrowed, and stole that. We played show and tell with our assessment resources. And every week, even that first Saturday that we met, we shared at least one resource that we had used, and we got to discuss, as Donald mentioned, the different ways we could use these resources in our classrooms. Yeah.
The best part is we all came together going, well, this is what I do in my class. It's not that great, but this is what I do. And the rest of us are like, oh my God, that's genius. And we all just kind of looked at each other. Every time, I know for myself, it was, well, this is kind of what I do. I work with the babies. I work with the younger students, kind of saying, here's computer science. It's fun. You get to click. You get to use a lot of blocks. You get to have fun, move sprites. This is computer science. And kids are like, oh. But I come to the table going, well, I just do a little bit of this. And to have fellow teachers go, that's amazing. It's like, wow. It's like the A on the report card for the students. Where a lot of teachers don't feel empowered. I don't know anything about computer science. I can't teach that. Well, I came to the table going, I do a little bit, and was encouraged by my fellow panel members saying, you do a lot more than you realize.
Just to add on to that, one thing that was really cool about our group was that we did have that range from pre-K, kindergarten, all the way up through 12th grade with some pre-college courses, so that we could really see how it aligns from the top down. And us at the high school level, I think, see a lot of computer literacy gaps that we need to fill before we can get to the actual computer science, so that we could really see where do those gaps begin and how can we help close those gaps at those early stages, so that by the time they get to high school, you don't need to spend time teaching them how to copy and paste, that they're able to do that and they can focus instead on conditionals and functions and all that really fun stuff.
So you've both started to talk about my next question, which is, what are the problems that we're trying to face? What problems do beginner CS teachers have in developing computer science assessments? And I should start by saying that most of these folks have taught CS for a little longer than a beginning CS teacher. So yeah, go ahead.
So one of the problems that I face is that the confidence level. I do teach kindergarten through 4th grade, so it is 5-year-olds, and they're like, well, what do 5-year-olds know about this? But I am a math and science teacher by education. So for me to be in technology, it's kind of like putting all of this stuff together and creating STEAM lessons or STEM lessons that put everything together. And so I think confidence as a teacher in your computer science ability is a big problem that a lot of teachers are facing while they are trying to teach computer science.
Imagine developing assessments for something that you are not personally confident in the content of as well.
Or developing assessments in something that you're trying to build the students' confidence in, and you don't want to say, no, you're not really good at that. You're trying to figure out all the other ways going, no, you use 58 blocks when you should have used 3. Well, let's see how we can do better.
Yeah. I want to.
Sure, yeah. Go ahead. Some, I think, have a formal background in computer science, but not all.
Who has a formal background in it?
Oh, hey, just one. There you go.
I think to add on to that point, one of the things that's really been cool in New York City is that we've realized the need that our students need, these courses, the experiences it provides them, especially as they develop and they get older and they start looking for internships, college opportunities, how many companies are asking for students to develop these skills. So I think a lot of us, even though we don't have a formal certification or degrees, they're having a lot of opportunities provided in the city to help provide us training So even sometimes, I know how you mentioned math and science, I'm an English teacher. And when I started, I taught 5 periods of English a day in 1 CS class. Now I teach 5 CS classes and 1 English class a day. So it's still weird saying that I'm a computer science teacher, but there is an idea that the need is important here for our children. And I'm glad to have the opportunities to meet with other educators to figure out how to best support them in that endeavor.
That was good.
Another challenge is scaling up your practice for a lot of students. And I think that probably applies to most subject areas, but in computer science, there is a confidence gap, and so being able to meet one-on-one with a student and going over line by line what's going on here, doing that when you have 600 students, how do you design an experience that feels that is not, I tried something and it gets a grade, yes or no, and I don't know what to do with that. How do we design something as though a teacher's one-on-one when there aren't enough teachers to do a one-on-one? So that was a big problem that we discussed a lot about.
Coming from a biology background, I didn't really know anything about CS, and this is only my 3rd year teaching the class. I felt like, and I was the only teacher in my school for the first 2 years teaching it. I had no support. No one else in the school had any idea what I was doing. Didn't really care much. They were supportive, kind of, but we were kind of told, okay, here's a curriculum, and like you figure out all the little details that are going to work for your students. And working in a public New York City high school, there's many, many needs and a huge diverse range of students that you have to meet all of those needs. So, and it was 1 period a day out of my 5, so I was teaching 4 other sections that were getting most of my time. So a lot of the assessments that I started using were from SRI, which I'm going to assume people know. Do we know that? No? Okay. So SRI is a research organization. Can I call it that? Research group. And they created these assessments, kind of a unit exam, more or less, for the Exploring Computer Science curriculum. And it was great because I had something that I didn't have to make myself, but I felt like my students really struggled because I wasn't able to get them like check marks along the way. So one thing that I've really been working on last year and this year is figuring out, okay, how can I break this unit exam up into pieces? And how can I figure out what my students don't know in a tangible way that looks like the exam that they're gonna get at the end of this unit? And be able to kind of formatively assess them and then help them along the way so that they don't get this exam and then say, I have no idea, this doesn't look anything familiar to what we're doing in class.
I think for my school, the challenge has really been thinking about how to approach assessment in a way that is not intimidating or scary for students. If you put a 30, 40 question test in front of someone, that is a way different experience than actually like creating something and assessing their performance on that. And that has its own challenges too. And I feel like I'm only starting to figure it out with like the help of this group.
And one problem that I've run into, I come from a science teaching background, chemistry, physics, earth and space science, always something where there was a skill and there was a specific knowledge that you wanted them to be able to repeat to you. In computer science, I find that there's a skill which is much more easily taught, but then you also need to assess their thinking, because sometimes you can wander into the right answer and they won't know why that's right, just that it works. And you really need to put that emphasis on, well, why do you think that worked the way you wanted it to? What was your reasoning behind doing this instead of doing that?
So we've talked a lot about the problems, especially because unfortunately, the big answer is we didn't solve CS assessment during the CS assessment fellows, but we furthered the conversation in a big way. And in our last couple of minutes before we switch to Q&A, I wanted to glean some of the takeaways you got. And in a lot of ways, it was also just that sense of support and confidence and being able to discuss our process with one another, as teachers do not often get dedicated time to do. But what were some other gems that you gleaned from the experience?
So one takeaway that we had, or at least I had, was giving students an explicit strategy for solving a problem. So this is how I would do it. I would break it down. I would, whatever. Giving them an explicit strategy first, and then giving them a problem for which that strategy would apply is much, much more effective than letting them sort of discover it on their own. So this sort of inquiry-based learning is sort of the technique where you sort of let them struggle on their own. And then there's like, oh, once they get it, they'll really get it because they struggled on their own. However, we discussed and we read and there were some TED Talks regarding this, that that can be such a painful process. You'll lose them along the way. So actually just saying, this is a game plan, let's test the game plan. Now, here's a problem. Watch how well the game plan works.
One thing that I think Katie said the first time we met was when we were explaining our assessments, like the first show and tell, is this concept of redo. And what she does, I think, tell me if I'm butchering it, is she has a problem that she works with the students with, and if they are not solving it correctly, she sits one-on-one with them and she's like, all right, well, we're gonna keep redoing it until you master it, until you get it right. And I really thought that although it's not something that I think I could do every day with 5-year-olds, it is something that I could try to put into practice. Tell me why you're doing this, and let's see where you're stuck, instead of me just telling you how to do it and moving on to the next thing.
And that might help answer that problem that a couple of us identified of that losing students' confidence, right? Where they always feel like, if I get it wrong, I'm bad at computer science, I can't do this. What if they could redo, because computer science is a process and it's not just I get it right the first time. You should be iterating.
So I give them, 1/3 of their grade is this thing I call a booster. And a booster is a one-on-one assessment. They have to sit with me. And the one rule is you must get a 100 on this. You get a 0 on this or you get a 100 on this. So we do it. If they got anything wrong, I was like, okay, well, we got to do it again. If it takes you, I don't know how many tries it takes you, you must get a 100. So they'll do it again. And if there was an issue, we talk about it and they do it again and they do it again. And so that's the one rule of boosters, is that you must keep doing it until you get it right. And this is what the first problem of scale. Now my biggest class is 16 students, so I can do this. How do we scale this? And so that was one thing. Is there a way to automate this? It was like the discussion, but yeah.
The best part about our assessment, or my assessment with the younger grades, is it's a lot of games. They think they're playing games, and Megan and I do our best to get the latest and greatest toys and technology and everything tech. And just watching them, and you're kind of doing the formative assessment of, okay, they're not understanding. Well, they put the tablet down, they walked away, they gave up. Okay, got to go back and help them. Or when you get the parents on back to school night or in the emails saying, oh my goodness, I can't imagine they want this tech toy for Christmas or for their birthday. What do I get? They want to learn more about coding. And right there is the biggest assessment that I can have of, wow, the kid is interested in computer science. I don't care what their grade is. They're young. They're under 8th grade. It's more or less how well they're trying. And yes, there is some summative evaluations. But at the end of the day, do they care about it? Are they excited about it? And do I have a future to give them to one of these people at the high school level and actually have a class where they have the confidence? We have the mice and the bee-bots where you program them, and it's really funny to watch little kids run them into the walls on purpose because they know they're doing it wrong, but that's what, at the end of the day, that's what they're trying for, and they've excelled. And you see the expression on their face, and that's better than any grade I can give them for when they have that confidence. Even when they're doing it wrong, they know they're doing it wrong. So it's almost like they're getting the A on doing it wrong.
Cool.
I think one of the cool takeaways that I got from this experience, especially I would recommend to first-time or beginner CS teachers, is really understanding that you're bringing something to the table from your other prior experience. You know, if you didn't begin teaching computer science, whether it was the science, math, ELA, humanities, in my perspective, especially in New York where we're at right now, last year I had the pleasure to go and read for the AP CSP exam, and there was a lot of teachers from other areas across the United States who didn't have the opportunity to regularly meet with other teachers and have conversations and talk about what experiences did they bring to the table and how were they able to use it to support the students' better understanding in their classroom. I've had the pleasure to work with various groups in New York City per se, and I'm even looking in the room, I'm seeing some people who I started with a couple summers ago. Like I said, I was an ELA teacher. A lot of the assessments focus on having students develop their discussion skills, their writing skills, analyzing the impact of computer science in their lives. And it wasn't until interacting with other teachers, realizing, hey, I'm already doing this in my English class. Why am I not bringing these skills over into my CS class to support the students as well? So once a teacher can understand there are other resources and skills they can bring to the table from elsewhere to support their students, is a great way to build them towards better understanding how to assess their students.
Very cool.
Test. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think something I've learned is, I try to make my assessments project-based, and something I've really thought a lot about since we started this is like, how do I know it's like a valid assessment of a skill that I want to see if they mastered it or not? And I used to start out like with really big projects, really sweeping projects, always try to keep it relevant to students. I think what I found is like, what's important is not just that, but it's like making it relevant, making it fun, but also like iterating over it again and again. And so I feel like if students, and that's kind of what formative assessment is the idea that you repeat and you're getting data and they're mastering the skills. And so it's really influenced how I've structured things in my curriculum this year.
One of the lovely assignments that I got to see was a test. And when you look at tests, you're scared, but it's what's missing or what's wrong. It's kind of like those hidden pictures of, wait a second, what's different? And the kids are able to identify what's wrong, what's missing, and remix it on a paper, which builds a lot of confidence because it's not your standard, okay, write me an essay about it. And the kids are able to really excel at that.
Very cool. Any last words of wisdom to share? Cool.
I guess the one thing that I would say is that although we are computer science teachers, there is a lot of value in pen and paper work. It really forces the kids into doing the thinking on their own instead of just going off onto Google and trying to find something that looks like what they want, and then using that to, make it a little bit their own remixed version of it. So definitely, whenever you can assess with a paper question, use that, because it will really allow you to see what they know versus what they're just kind of throwing stuff at and hoping it sticks.
Very cool. We want to pause for a Q&A from the audience. But first, a big round of applause for our cool CS fellows. And I'll emphasize again, a lot of you, it's a school night. So thank you all for coming out. And to you too, audience. But are there any questions for this group in particular about the experience, how it was shaped, or anything?
Step up to the microphone.
Yes, you have to step up to the mic. Official Q&A style.
Good evening. I have a question. So in the 60s, there was a program that was developed called the African Primary Science Program. It was pretty revolutionary at the time. They brought together leaders across Africa, and they tried to bring inquiry into elementary classrooms in Africa. I won't go into detail about the program, but it was seen as a big success. And one of the metrics that they used was they put a set of materials in front of students, and they wanted to see how long do the students stay engaged with the materials. Do they explore them for 5 minutes and then say, oh, we're all done, we've seen everything we have to see? Or do they spend hours exploring the materials? And one of the things they found was after introducing this inquiry approach, students spent longer periods of time with the materials and were able to engage themselves for longer periods of time. And I wonder if that kind of assessment played any role in your conversation about what you're assessing and what you're looking for in terms of growing the future computer scientists or just computationally literate children.
Yeah, so like I said, I have the very young kids, and we play a lot with robots because for me, it's one thing to be able to put a code on a computer, but it's another thing to actually have something tangible in your hand and be able to code it. So I don't necessarily give grades to those children. They get A's, but it is the engagement and how they are, just playing. They're figuring out through playing, and most of it is problem solving for me. If they can figure out how something works, then I think that later on they'll be more successful in every academic area. If they can figure out, how to solve a problem, like how do I get this robot to work, then eventually they'll be better off.
And that is inquiry. I think we definitely saw a range of, especially inquiry on the lower grade levels, because computer science and playing with robots involves a lot of figuring things out and doing some inquiry-based play.
I've definitely seen what you're mentioning, where when you add inquiry to the lesson, the kids just get so much more invested in it. I teach my intro class, starts off with Scratch and then moves into Python. When we first start doing things, it's very much guided. Do what I'm doing, watch what happens. Now try it a little bit different yourself. And as you start to release them into having more freedom to do it, they start to enjoy it. But they tend to be like, okay, I figured it out, I'm done. The trick is, it's not really a trick. Anyway, the thing is, you need to give them a challenge. When they have that challenge, they do start to obsess over it. Most of them do. They'll start to really, really dig in and try and figure out, how can I do this? Why isn't this working? But if we don't slowly release them to that inquiry, I've seen that they just give up right away. So it's a matter of getting them to that point where they have the fortitude to persist when they don't know it right away.
Very cool. And I think a lot of the inquiry research is where Exploring Computer Science came from with their inquiry pedagogy as well. Yeah, come
guys. I'm Kelly. I teach at Avenues, so I'm very fortunate to have small class sizes as well. And something that we're trying to do this year is we're trying to develop a tool where we can measure where the kids are with their coding, kind of like a literacy test, but we don't have any levels or anything like that. But I was wondering what you thought about it. So one of the things that we're trying to do is measure, can the kids read the code? So we give them code in a language that they've been working on, and we ask them to tell us what it does. And then we tell them there's a bug, like it's supposed to do this. Oh, it's based off that Harvard assessment.
Yep.
Yeah. And so essentially I wanted to know what you guys thought about that assessment, and what do you think some of the things that we should be measuring are? Like, should we be measuring whether they can read it, whether they can write it, whether they can have extensions on it, that sort of thing? What's come up in those discussions that you guys have had?
First, can they luck out and do it? Like Will said, can they figure it out from Google? And then the next step is, can they create it on their own pen and paper without actually running it? And then let's put it to the test of a computer, and are you confident enough?
I think to add on to that point, I've used the AP 50, or at least an aspect of it in my classroom, where sometimes they start individually and then they have to come together in a small group or with partners and review their responses and come to a group decision. I like the idea of having the students read the code, analyze the code, debug the code, but I think that's something that's really cool with computer science is what can they do differently with the code? What ideas can they get from it and create something different? A lot of times I love taking my students on like hackathon competitions and in the school, and we really try to convey the message to the students. It's okay if you don't eventually finish your app. It's hard to put a dead set time that your app has to be finished or your code has to be finished in 2 hours, but do you have the outline, the thought process? Can you see what it's doing now and take some considerations on what else could be done? So I think that would be another way to take it, like working with a partner. What can you do differently with this code? What can be a way you could remix it?
I might be an outsider here. I personally, I don't enjoy reading code. I don't enjoy reading other people's code. I have a problem with it myself, and so I think that informs me. So I actually don't have them do that read code and find the bug. It's a personal preference to have them. Every project they start from nil. I don't give them any starter code at all, and it's part of that is so because I want them to be independent from me as soon as possible, so that if you go home, you can even do you even know how to start a new project? We teach in Java. Do you even know if you use Eclipse or IntelliJ how to even open up that program and start a new project? Some of them, if everything's all set up for me, I can fill in the for loop. But then they leave and they don't even know how do you get all that stuff around it? So that's my own philosophy is that they always have to start with nothing to make a project. But that just might be me.
Cool. So y'all joked with me before that I went overtime all the time. We went overtime on this panel. But I want to bring up our research panel and give this crew another big round of applause. Very cool. Thank you all so much for coming out. So we have a second panel coming up. Nice. So I mentioned at the very beginning that Sarah helped me write the initial kind of vision document for what the CS Assessment Fellows would be, and the first questions that we would even ask them. And it was because we wrote a grant, a DRK-12 grant to the National Science Foundation. And then toward the end of the CS Assessment Fellows, we found out that it was recommended to be funded. We're like,
I can't believe you're saying that out loud.
yeah, recommended. Yeah, it's very exciting. So we are hoping to continue this work now that we might have some money to continue this work. That's great. But first I want to establish, who are these people? Who are these panelists? So let's go around and say who we are and what we do.
Hi, I'm Sarah Bonner, and I'm faculty at Hunter College in educational psychology, and my specialization is classroom assessment and testing.
I'm Catherine St. John. I'm a professor of computer science at Hunter College and a research associate at the American Museum of Natural History. My research is in computational biology. I build family trees for biological data.
My name is Rachel Cole. I'm a research associate at the Research Alliance for New York City Schools. It's a research center out of NYU. And pertinent to this panel, we're tasked with evaluating New York City's Computer Science for All initiative.
Hi, I'm Cheng. I'm a research associate at Hunter College, and I work for Dr. Bonner.
Hi, I'm Peggy Chen. I am one of the faculty members in educational psychology. I work along with Sarah Bonner, and my research and specialties in learning and self-regulated learning.
Very cool. So we wanted to start with the research why. Why is assessment important to us, and especially in the context in which we work? We work in different contexts, some of us, so you can customize that based on where you work and who you are assessing.
Okay, I'll talk first. So there's a little echo. So if I'm not sure how many of y'all are from New York City. If you're not aware, New York City has begun a couple years ago an ambitious private-public partnership to try to bring computer science to all students over a 10-year period. And my organization is kind of the external evaluator for that. So, from our perspective, part of what we're tasked with is trying to help the folks at the Department of Education that work on computer science for all, help them understand how implementation is going. And they're doing a lot of professional development for teachers in how to teach computer science, but they would like to know, are students learning things? This is really challenging. Computer science, as compared to some of the other disciplines that you may remember from elementary, middle, and high school, it doesn't have anywhere near the infrastructure that this other subjects do. So if you go into an algebra class in any city or state in the United States, they're going to look pretty similar. If you go into a computer science class, it could look super different depending on who is teaching and what they're interested in, what kind of training they had. There's just not the consensus about what students should be learning, especially not since in New York City, they're trying to do it from K through 12. There's the most consensus around the APCS principles exam because there's a big test and they have a curriculum that's attached to that test. When there isn't a set out curriculum for a particular grade band, and also when there isn't an assessment that's linked with it, it's a lot harder to know what should we assess. And I think also that assessment is always challenging, but I think the teachers talked some about reasons why assessment is particularly challenging in computer science, because we're interested in the thinking that happened, that went behind the code. We're interested in the process that led to the answer. And all of that's really hard to get to with a multiple choice question, which is, of course, the cheapest way to assess kids, as you may remember from the SAT. So we're tasked with trying to develop assessments to help assess student outcomes across the city, and it is pretty challenging. I think though it is from a citywide initiative standpoint, just as a taxpayer of New York City, I would like to make sure that we have at least some answers. There's quite a lot of money being put into this initiative. In some scarce budgetary times, money is being put into computer science as compared to many, many, many other things that it could be put into. So I think it is reasonable to have a sense of accountability for this, but I think the existing assessment instruments are not necessarily where we'd want them to be. So that's the dilemma that I'm living in right now.
Yeah. Just making a test for 1.1 million kids. No big deal. It's cool. Have it on your desk by tomorrow night.
Sure.
Very cool. So that kind of sets the scene of where we are in New York City. And we're all working on, or we will be working on, a cool project, especially about formative assessment.
Yeah.
So why formative assessment?
So we have a kind of thing here, I think, a little contrast, because, so I'm this project that Tom keeps referring to that we're being a little secretive about. We're being secretive about it because Tom and myself and Catherine and Professor Chen, Peggy, I'm so used to calling her Professor Chen, are co-PIs on a proposal that we're at the last stage. So we've been recommended, but we don't have the letter. So I can't say, and it's an exploratory proposal on formative assessment in computer science at the high school level. And my abiding interest in this is two ways. First of all, the question came up in the last group, like, well, what are we trying to measure? And that was something that, CSAP, we kind of know what we're measuring. Well, we kind of know what we're testing, but is that what we should be measuring? And the whole idea of computational thinking and what is it, and the National Science Foundation wants it to cross everything. And and that has to do with what values do we want to be what values do we have that we want students to, that relate to what we want students to learn and how we want them to be able to take what they learn in computer science, and even if they don't become programmers, use it in their lives. So that's one thing, is I'm just fascinated by the question in computer science, what are we trying to measure? What are the outcomes we want? And the other one is, how do we use assessment for learning? I'm not particularly interested in, although I am, and I have a history in that, but I don't look at that as being the project that we're trying to engage in. So it's really, and it doesn't have to be a conflict if you have nice alignment, which Christy talked to, about trying to figure out how to break down a big test into something that's useful for learning. But that's a really interesting continuum, is how do you take that, do you start with the output and try to align the instruction? And those are all very complicated things.
Yeah, formative assessment, and just for anyone who's unclear on the difference between formative and summative assessment, I love how you explain it. Formative assessment is assessment for learning, right? And summative assessment is assessment of learning. Did I get it right?
Yeah, but some people will also even go so far as to say that formative assessment is assessment as learning, which is part of the fact that you learn from your assessments. And if you learn that assessments are only summative, then you learn something different. You learn that it's all about your products and not about your processes. And so a lot of people who are interested in formative assessment also are interested in what do people learning as they're going through these experiences.
Yeah, and if you heard our CS assessment fellows slipping back and forth between like the pedagogy that they use in their classrooms and how they teach and how they assess, it's because they are inextricably tied, especially when you're talking about formative assessment. So yeah, I'm curious about the rest of your opinions thus far on the problem and why you're interested in this work, especially. And even Catherine, who teaches 500 undergrads.
Why am I here? So I'm here because about 10 years ago, someone showed me a graph that showed that the year I graduated from college was the high water mark for the percentage of women earning an undergraduate degree. Not even my experience for my master's or my PhD, but an undergraduate degree in computer science. And I realized I had to be part of the solution. And so I've done a huge number of programs, from teaching kindergartners with robots and Python and and even dice and sitting there and doing probability, all the way up to graduate students. There isn't a gender gap in STEM. There's been more women getting undergraduate degrees in STEM since 2000, but there is a gender gap in tech, in the T. The percentage of women getting an undergraduate degree in tech is 17%. The percentage of students in New York City is just appalling. So, I've done tons of different projects, including some great stuff with Yvonne's program, Bridge Up STEM. I wrote the curriculum for it, the first iteration. And at Hunter, they're giving me the opportunity to change the world. And so this term, I have 350 students. Next term, I'll have 800. And the idea is to give enough seats so that no one is excluded from computer science. Because one of the explanations for the sudden drop of women in computer science versus women in biology or women in chemistry or pick any other science is that there wasn't enough seats, so they gave the seats to people who had past experience. And the ones who had past experiences were the ones who got a computer for Christmas or their bar mitzvah when they were 13 and hung out in the basement. And that excluded a lot of boys, and it excluded a lot of girls. And so that's the general, we need enough seats. So Hunter is unusual in that the chair and the presidents have lots of power, and they said that we will not exclude anyone from intro computer science. And we will get every single one of them a seat. So that's how I ended up with Sarah. I think a lot about assessment. I think a lot about how to structure the environment and how to give a lot of one-to-one feedback. We have incredibly strong undergraduates. We have a dearth of folks who have a bachelor's or higher who can actually be in the classroom. And so we have been trying to figure out how to give feedback by using just a fleet of undergraduate teaching assistants. They stay with us for about a year. They learn basically how to do tech interviews by helping frustrated students in the lab. They can answer almost any question, and then they go off and get fabulous internships. So that's been our kind of our stopgap, like how do you do it? But that's why I'm here. And so I thought a lot about assessment, but not at the high school level. I have 600 students, what am I going to do?
Very cool.
Very different.
So I work with Sarah, and where I come in is that right now there is a overlap between formative assessment and self-regulated learning. So the assessment is not talked about uniquely and independently, but there are processes in formative assessment that are related to learning. So, what we're interested in is with this project, we will hope to see how students learn through multiple cycles, iteratively, as a number of you mentioned, and also just to see the changes of student learning and can they even notice their changes in their understanding and documenting it and make it very explicit so that they are monitoring their own learning so that's shift formative assessment even further to self-assessment and to be very explicit of their learning. And so our job as instructors, teachers, are at what point do we give feedback? Do we model every step through problem solving and then do it over and over? Or do at a certain point we provide necessary feedback? And so what we are trying to look at is to really detail the learning processes in this project and hope to shed more light about different processes and also teacher feedback, because formative assessment really makes sense when students take their information and your feedback and use it again, rather than here I got feedback from my teachers, I know how I did, and that's the end. So we would really like to have this process going a number of times and make that to be the focus rather than here, this is what you learn. We want to focus on how you actually move from one step to the next and how teachers change also the types of feedback that you can provide to students as they change.
Very cool. Go ahead.
So what I've been working on with Dr. Bonner and also with Christy, I've been in her classroom interviewing students. So a little snippet of what I do is I come up with a task that they have done in class. So what we want them to do is to think aloud as they're trying to solve the problem. So what we are trying to do is to find out how students process and think as they try to debug or try to solve the problem, as well as documenting how the perseverance and their attitude toward it.
And I think one of the goals of that is that it can help us in this project. What we're going to try to do is we're going to try to form a design team. So here's advertising. So we're going to have a design team of computer science teachers, and we're going to work to build formative assessments that measure specific aspects of computational thinking within whatever relevant computer science curriculum that are iterative, so each one can be repeated with a parallel task, and that bring out specific processes that we're seeing in these think alouds, and that we hope will both reveal students' gaps, their areas of struggle, the areas where the kinds of feedback they can get to show growth, things that happen with their attitudes. I always say in these think alouds, this is almost the only place that in high schools where I ever see, we see this in Christy's class all the time, is the students go, I'm so excited, I got it. And you never see this in a math class. I mean, and they also are like, I was angry at it. I was angry at that problem, but then I felt really great. I don't think I've ever seen that in a regular high school class outside the computer science classrooms. So we hope that we'll be able to design the tasks so that students will experience that frustration that can build to learning, and then be able to go get the next, everyone will be getting boosters. Part of it is like scaling that.
Very cool. Any other final thoughts about what we hope to see in the assessment world, either as a result of our project or the projects you're working on?
I guess I'd be interested in you all's opinions on the kind of assessments that I was talking about. This past week, all 3rd through 8th graders in New York State had to take a English language arts test. Would it be good if we had? Right, I see a lot of shaking heads. I'm curious about, how far would we want assessments to be developed, standardized? Do we think that would stifle some of the creativity that comes along with computer science instruction for kids? Or would that kind of formalization allow more teachers to jump in and feel the confidence that some of the teachers were talking about earlier? Because there would be a plan and you would know what you would do day by day. That's a question I have for you all.
Yeah, and I encourage you to look at, if you haven't already, the AP Computer Science Principles exam, because it was designed with broadening participation in mind, so much so that it includes a very creative element, the create task, as well as another great tenet of curricula that are designed for students like those in New York City Public Schools, but relating computer science to things that students care about and things in their own lives with the, what's the other task? The explore task, there you go. So the explore task and the create task together are not, there is a multiple choice component, but those represent a significant percentage of the exam. So even in a standardized exam, we're not trying to design another assessment that looks exactly like every other subject area. We're trying to design something that maybe might look a little different and might honor the ethos of what we really cherish about computer science, that it is process-based and creative and honors kids' passions about the subject and really honors their perseverance over a lot of other things. So it is one attempt at the balance between these two philosophies. So you should definitely take a look.
Well, I was just going to say, like, on that note, what is the goal? What is the goal of computer science instruction? Are we trying to make more software engineers? Are we trying to make 21st century citizens, et cetera? Are you trying to build creativity? And if, depending on what that goal is, the assessment's going to look really different. So
yeah,
I think that's been it's been a real challenge in the way the country has rolled out the giant amount of money it's gone into computer science education. So it starts with the need coming from industry, basically, saying we need more computer scientists, and if we don't get women, we're never going to get them, right? That's the problem. They could hire every single man who could do computer science, and they're not meeting the need for computer scientists. And not just computer scientists, but people in the tech world, in the design world, things like that. So how are we going to get the women in? You get this giant load of money. And they want the money spread everywhere so that nobody, even at kindergarten, is getting left out of the pipeline. Yeah. It can trickle up. They don't really care if they get, however many million kindergartners, then they'll get enough graduating high school to go into your class, right, Catherine? Am I right here? Yeah, so they'll get enough. And then they'll get a lot more people graduating high school with various kinds of competences that people don't have right now, the whole literacy issue. But that means that they haven't defined all the goals. The goals are very different at different levels, and attention at different levels hasn't gotten there yet, which I think is great because I love a free-for-all. It's still like this territory that people can get into. The only thing I would say in terms of your problem would be just lovely if you could wait a few years until there has been enough money in the system that the National Council on Measurement and Education people can find it attractive. They're still uptown somewhere having their annual conference, and they're very into tech and assessment right now. And what technology-enhanced assessment can do for computer science education assessment is like everything. Because it can be completely interactive and completely iterative. So can you wait?
I don't think we're allowed to wait. We have a contract.
So unfortunately, I think the answer we're coming to at the end of this panel is we don't have all the answers either. But we are still discussing them and working on them. And I think, I want to end with, I think this is the point I made the end of our Friday fun panel. You've seen teachers from K-12, you've seen professors and even a research associate from 12 to 16 and beyond, right? It really does take a village of people who are working on this problem. And we're excited that we have some K to 16 people who are all invested in this and working together on the problem of assessment in computer science. And hopefully, maybe the next panel, we'll all come back with the answers. All right? Cool. I'm not going to do formal Q&A up here. I'm going to send you to go get more pizza and wine. But please stick around if you have questions. A lot of our CS assessment fellows stuck around, so you can chat with them about their experience. Our researchers, some might stick around for a couple of minutes, and they can talk about their research. And thank you all for coming. Let's give everyone a big round of applause again. Yay.